Hi there, this is GroovyNG and welcome back to my channel. So I've got a really fun one to go through today. I'm going to be talking all about drum breaks again, and this is going to be the second part of my drum break series, but we're going to be focusing on the SSX command in Renoise and sample offset and some of the old school methods of chopping up breaks. There's something to be said for following the footsteps of the people who pioneered these genres and these techniques, and with drum breaks it was actually quite common to just take one break and really go to town on that. Now you can take any drum break you want for this, but the famous ones like the Funky Drummer and the Apache and Assembly Line are all really good ones to use for this because people recognize them and people like hearing sounds that they've heard before, but also they're good breaks. They've been shown that they hold up well to processing and that they sound great in clubs. So going for one of the classic breaks can be a good start here. And so for this track we're going to use the Apache by the incredible Bongo Bongo Band. Okay, so I've got a good Apache break here, and by the notes I've put in Audio Finder it looks like it's come from a Dogs on Acid breaks pack, which I've probably found hunting around at some point in my life. But actually, before I'm going to do anything, I'm going to do a bit of processing to this break right in the beginning. And this was also quite a common technique. People would saturate their breaks and distort them and run them through compressors and do all kinds of things to kind of beef up the breaks and get them to sound a bit fatter and warmer, and one of those buzzwords people throw around too often. But I think it'd be quite a good thing to show you, and so to do this I'm going to use Logic just because I think this sort of stuff is a bit simpler to do in a DAW like Logic. So we're going to open up Logic and just create a new empty project.
Amiga speaking. Turning on the power.
Okay, so I'm in Logic now and I've just converted the Apache into a mono audio file by summing the left and right signals together. And now we're going to do a little bit of processing. Now for my processing of breaks before I'm going to use them, I don't usually go too crazy on things like reverb or compression or additive EQ. I usually save that sort of stuff for later. But what I'm really going to focus on here is distortion and saturation, subtractive EQ where I might move a little bit of mud or some harsh resonances. And I also sometimes like to gate the audio signal and remove some of the room sound or the reverb and just tighten up some of the hits. Okay, let's just start with a little bit of saturation. You can really distort your breaks and that's definitely an effect to go for, but I'm trying to make this break usable as my core sound and I don't want to have it too distorted and slamming the whole time. See, that gets really crazy there. But I've put this oscilloscope up here just so you can see the way we're going to tame. If I play this break, it's quite peaky here and it's got some quite transient heavy hits, but as I bring in some saturation, you see it's kind of taming all of these transients and it's making a bit of a fatter file. That just a little bit of saturation there is actually really getting rid of a lot of these super transient heavy peaks, and that will just help us later on in the mixing stage. We can essentially get more headroom out of the sound. I won't overcomplicate here, but a lot of mixing, or especially achieving loudness in mixing, is about reducing peak level and then increasing the overall level of a sound. And so by reducing these big peaks and kind of flattening out the waveform a little bit, we will be able to get a louder sound for the same peak value later on in our mix. So I've beefed up my break a bit now just with a bit of the preamp in decimal and some saturation from Decapitator. And let's just look and see if we can't tighten up this break a little bit. I'm just doing a little bit of enveloping here and I'm just reducing a little bit of the room sound in between the hits. I don't want to remove it completely because then the break will sound too choppy, but I just want to calm it down a little bit. Nice. You can also add a little bit of attack, can sometimes sound quite good. We've pulled in some of the transients with our saturation, and then we now have the opportunity to maybe add a little bit of attack back in. Now I might just have a look at the EQ. Regions I'm kind of looking at, in between 200 and 400 hertz, you have a lot of warmth and low end and some good tones down there, but you also can get a lot of mud, especially around 200 hertz. And sometimes this can be a good place to look to just put little cuts in, and just a little dip can help make certain sounds, especially drum breaks, a lot cleaner. Doing a little bit there, and then I might just kind of sweep. I'm not hearing anything super resonance at the moment, but as I sweep through, something might jump out of me. There's some resonances in here. Oh, that's a nasty one. So if you just listen before and after the EQ, I haven't done a huge amount here. I could also maybe clean up some of this real low end, maybe around 28 hertz, and just get rid of anything super subby in the break. I haven't done a crazy amount with any of this processing, but if I take it all away and I show you a before and after, you'll see it's just cleaned everything up a bit and made it a bit fatter, tamed some of the transients, given it a bit of saturation, and just made it a bit more of a usable break. So let's go before. And after. I think I might have gone a little bit too hard on the attack. Maybe a little bit too hard on Decapitator. Cool. So here's what I'm talking about. You can see this big peak here in the transient, and I've just shaved that off a bit, and that's just going to help us get a little bit more headroom out of this break. One other thing I might do, and I'm going to save this as my kind of core sound, is I might just go and run this break. I've got some hardware kit you can see here. I've got an analog heat here, which is like a great saturation distortion box, and then I've got this Fairfield Shallow Water, which is a random pitch modulation warbling thing, but if you drive the circuits you get some quite fat distortion out of that. And then this Strymon Deco does more tape warbling, but also has a tape saturation when you drive it into this. So I might just bounce a few copies of me messing around with these different bits of hardware. What I've done now is I have got all the files that I recorded from my hardware, and I've normalized everything, and then I've also got the Apache that we've gone and processed. I just want to show you the kind of difference and what these bits of hardware are doing, and it's quite useful to have all these versions of the breaks because you can do break swapping techniques later, and you can bring in rougher distorted ones and swap them out. So it is useful to keep all these things and to go through this process. And it also teaches you all about how your different distortion plugins and bits of hardware sound when you compare them against each other. So I'll just do a quick playthrough and you can hear all the different versions and how they're sounding. So let's start with the Apache. Cool, so that should just give you a little idea of how all these different sort of saturation and distortion circuits sound. If I was going to say a quick comment on them, I like the one that I did in Logic. I think it's nice and clean to use as a general break. The clean boost is also a great one because it just does a little bit of transient taming. If you compare the clean boost to the original file, you can see it's just done a little bit, but it doesn't change the sound that much. The rough crunch is pretty crazy, and you get a lot of level because it really smashes all the transients in, so you can get it super loud when you use that like heavy distortion. It does a lot of compression and limiting. The Strymon Deco is also an absolute beast, and it has a really nice kind of warm, fat sound. So I actually like all of them, and I'm going to keep all of them. Okay, so I've saved Logic and now we're back in our favourite place, which is Renoise. So we're going to get into the heart and soul of this tutorial now, and I'm going to run you through this old school style of doing your breaks, and this really harks back to the Amiga and Pro Tracker and Octamed days of cutting up breaks. Okay, so the first thing to do is to listen through our break, and we actually want to get a nice 2-bar chop here. And that's going to just help us with the resolution a bit later on, and I think it will make sense as this tutorial goes on. So let's just play this through by pressing enter. I can see that it's somewhere around here, and I might just chop it right there. So I can select all of that with one double click, and I'm just going to cut it, go to a new instrument and paste it in there. And so now, so the next thing to do is to go to the BPM that we want for our song, and let's go to something kind of old school jungly, which is about 168, and we can just put a point in. But you can see that actually if I make this 32, that the break is not lining up correctly. Now before we had these automatic algorithms, you'd have to pitch up the break like this to get it to align properly. Maybe quicker. So it's getting, and then I'd have to fine tune it back down. And keep going like that until I eventually got a nice loop. But actually we can just use this beat sync. Oh, and it's telling me that it wants it a lot slower actually. Oh, it's gone the other way. And the reason it's done that is because I had the beat sync value wrong. So if I put it in 32, I think we should be, yeah, so we were back where I was looking. I wasn't being an idiot there. And let's just have that going like this. Nice, so we've now got the Apache and it's rolling around at our song tempo. So now if we were going to do this old school technique, we'd actually be ready to start chopping. But I'm actually going to show you another very common technique for getting your break to your tempo. And the one thing about having to speed up the drum break like this and pitch it up is you completely change the character of the break, and you might want to actually retain the original sound and transposition of the break, but actually get it to your song tempo. And there is a way to do this in Renoise, and I have shown this before in my videos, but I think it's worth going through again because it will become useful later on. And so to do this technique, we've actually got to put in slice markers at all the transients. So let's just go through and put them all in very quickly. Okay, so I've put all my slice markers in, and now what I can do is right click slices and render slices to phrase. One thing to make sure you've got your lines per beat value here on 16, and let's render to phrase. And two things I want to look at are the number of lines and the lines per beat value. And what I'm going to do is actually copy everything. I'm going to turn off the phrase, come into my main window. I can just create a new pattern, and let's go and put this to 128 and put the lines per beat value matching the phrase to 16. What I'm also going to do is turn on this delay value here. So when I paste it in, all the delay values are actually going to come in. And we can just make sure this is all working and just press play. Oh, and nothing is playing right now, and that's because I'm actually not triggering the right instrument. So what I've got to do is go 0 and 3, select that, Command C, Command P, and this is just a little quick shortcut for making sure these notes are triggering the correct instrument. So hopefully this should play properly now. Nice, so now we have the Apache, but it's playing at our tempo of 168, but it's still got its original pitch. If I compare it to the one I've pitched up, I'm going to have to put this one up to 128 as well now. And for this break, I don't actually like it pitched up that much. I much prefer it being at the original pitch. So what we can do is actually just select this whole track now. If I press Alt-T and I can right click and I can go render to sample like this. And now we're going to have the Apache. Cool, so I've done a bit of naming there just to make everything make more sense. One thing I want to quickly talk about is that you can actually quantize in Renoise, and if I quantize all of these notes now, I could start to nudge certain things around, and sometimes when you quantize, things just don't work quite perfectly. But I think this is actually okay, and what you can also do is render out this. So I now have a quantized version of this break as well. What I want to just show you quickly is the reason that quantizing can really help you with this sort of sample offset workflow. If I go and look at the unquantized drum break, you can see if I'm using this sample offset command, I can basically tell this break to trigger it from number 20 or from number 21. But you can see I actually want to kind of have my point here, which is in between both these values. And this is with a 2-bar break. So if you have a 4-bar break, you will have an even looser resolution that you can work with. That's just part of the method, and that's part of the old school sound is it's a little bit rough in terms of how you can align the drum hits. Now, if I go and look at the quantized break, what we've done is by quantizing it, the hits are actually going to line up perfectly with the offset command. And if I just start to kind of scoot around to random hits, you can see all the places that I put in my markers are now aligning a lot better, and everything will be a much tighter. So all my hits, I have left a little bit of room at the start of the hits, but everything's just going to align a lot better. So if you do want to use this sample offset method, but also get a clean sounding break, it can be quite useful to quantize your drums. One thing I think that is worth showing is a middle ground between fully quantizing your breaks and having them completely loose. If I go in Logic and use slicing, and there's Ableton's great for doing this sort of stuff as well. What I firstly want to do is actually just warp this break to my song tempo again. And so this is going to line up like this. And then you can just align your kicks and snares to the grid like this, and this will leave some of the original swing of these shuffle notes. If you look, these shuffle notes are still quite swung, but the kicks and the snares are going to line up. And I think if you do use another DAW apart from Renoise, it can be an even sort of better way is to quantize the kicks and snares but leave the shuffles unquantized, and that will retain some of the original feel of the break. So now it's time to get into actually programming a break with this sample offset method. Now, to keep things a little bit old school, I'm actually not going to use the quantized break, and I'm going to use the drum break which retained the original pitch but still was swung with the original groove. Now, what people would do before is you would cycle through your drums and you would find the hit, and you might even make a note of where the drum hits are. So I know this one's at 50, and I can kind of look through, and maybe I'm just really looking for the kicks and snares now. I know this first snare is at 20, so I might go 20 and write snare, and then I can kind of go through. That's a kick, and I'm just looking for the kind of main building blocks of the song here. It actually, if you look down here, you can see the value of where you click. So you can kind of click as close, and it's going to show you that that's a CF. And I can use enter to trigger kick, and then I want another shuffle maybe. I know putting, if I go to S00, that's the kick at the start. And maybe we sort of go kick, snare, snare maybe. Maybe move that down. Note there, and then this got another one here. Maybe the kick from the end, which is CF. Maybe we'll try another kick, maybe 7F. Maybe try that. Maybe I need to just fill this gap with some shuffly stuff. B0. Oh, that's kind of cool, and put some shuffles in there. I like that shuffly thing that's happening. Maybe like that. So you can try pitching here, and that is a very common thing to do, but you've got to remember it's going to pitch all the rest of the hits, so it works better if you're just doing it where the note's going to get cut off quite quickly after, unless you pitch down, and pitching down can be very cool. So maybe we just try pitch down an octave. Quite like the way it's like stopping the whole thing. And if I show you what's happening in this window, you'll be able to see the way it's jumping all around the place. Nice. So we've got a little pattern there. Maybe we'll just kind of finish this idea off and duplicate these down and create some variations here. So what's happening? So one of the reasons I love making these tutorials so much is I always end up stumbling on cool new ways of working and new techniques when I'm kind of delving into these topics to explain them. Okay, so I have this SSX command cheat sheet, and what this is essentially showing you is it's breaking down what will happen if you slice up a 2 or 4 bar section and how it will relate to note values and beat values, but also it's got this really helpful little section here, and it's showing you where all the half notes and the quarter notes would be in a 2 bar or a 4 bar section. And I'll show you how we can use this in a second. So what this is essentially telling me is when I do a 2 bar slice like I've done earlier, the reason I said it gives you better resolution is because each SSX point on a 2 bar slice will equal 128th note. But actually when you go to a 4 bar slice, you double that to a 64th note, and then an 8 bar slice would double it even more. So having a small slice amount will give you more SSX values to work with at a better resolution. So what's really interesting is when I look at this section here, and what we've got to do for a 2 bar slice is half some of these values. And so I'll show you now how we can use this in our projects. If I create a new section here, and let's just get a little bit down, and I'm going to go to this quantize break. And so what I can actually do now is if I put break values in, let's just make this a bit smaller, at every other hit. And so essentially every single line in this is a 16th note. So I've put values in at every 8th note hit. And if I then hold S and put S commands at every note, I can then come back to this window and I can look at this. So for a 4 bar slice, I would be using this 8th note value. But because I am halving it, I would actually come up a step and use this quarter note value. So what I've got to do is now put in these values into my editor. So it's actually really easy. I just go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E. And if I play this now and I go back to this window. So the reason we quantized this break earlier is so that when I do this technique, all of the main hits are going to line up. And if I just come in here, you can see this one's lining at 20. If I go to say another kick later on, this is aligning at A0. This is aligning at 90. And so when I put all these values in, they're going to play through correctly. So what's cool about this is I can actually increase the resolution, and we go and actually up this. And so we're going to put a note at every single value this time. And we're going to put a sample command at every single value. And then I can actually go back here to my window. I'm going to go down a level. So rather than doing a 16th note, I've got to look at the 8th note. And then I'm going to go 0, 0, 0, 8, 10, 18. So what we're going to do is we're going to go 0, 8, 0, 8, 0, 8, 0, 8, 0, 8. And then I can go 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9, 9. A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, F. And this one will now play through correctly if I play it. But what we can actually do is use this to our advantage. So if I create a copy now and I call this randomize, and I can use Alt-Z and just select the sample columns, and then I can actually use the hotkey, which if you go right click selection randomize is Alt F7. and I can randomize all these values. And now when I look at this, if I go home, it's just giving me random chops all over the break. So this is really cool. So I can keep kind of doing this until I find something I like. So I can hear, just in here, this little section. Maybe that. So I found a little, what's this, 6 lines that I like. And whilst it gives you quite a mental result for the whole thing, it can be really good if I add another, say another section of this one. And maybe I just go to the end of a bar. Or I could actually go where this is taking me and just see how this sounds. Well, that was kind of cool. Maybe like... And you can just use those bits of randomization to enhance your break and to give you little fills and cool little sections. And you don't really have to think about this. You can just listen. I like that. That's just a triple kick, but it's actually giving me 2 kicks from different places. So that's maybe why it sounds so good. So this little end bit might be a cool place to put that next section in. Maybe like little double. Nice. So what's great about this technique is it's quite easy to extend your drum patterns without having to think too much about programming extra notes. You can just come and pick little bits out of the randomization and then put them in copies of your drum pattern. And now I've got another 8-bar loop which is going to have a few little extra bits of fills in them to keep everything rolling around. So I don't think the fills I've put in there are perfect, but if you spend a little bit more time doing this than I have here, you can get some really good results with this, and especially with other drum breaks and testing out the different resolutions. I think there's definitely something to be gained from implementing this technique.
Composer.
So another common technique that would be used a lot is actually doing a kind of granular time stretch, and I've shown this a lot in my tutorials, but I've made this instrument here which I call time stretch effects, and I've basically packaged inside a phrase editor similar to where I'm triggering different points of the phrase. If you trigger each step of the SSX or of the sample offset, you can get these really cool granular stretches, and these are really cool to put in. One of the reasons why I like having it in a phrase editor is because it's easy to implement, and you can kind of drag. So say I want to use this break, I can just copy that into my time stretch effects, and now I can use my Apache there. I can also start to play with this lines per beat value in the break. And get some really crazy values. I think this number 4 one works really well for me usually. And that's like a super Akaiser style sound. And quite often I will just record this and I will resample. And I've just done this at 1 lines per beat, but I'll often mess with this, and also you can mess with the pitch. If I show you, if I just record again and play this again, if I start to kind of pitch this around, you can get some really cool effects. And if I just bring this up to level, that's like a tape effects break stop. And I want this to finish here. The other way I think to do a more traditional style stretch is actually just to take one element of the break. Snares are usually really good for this, and I want to make sure I've kind of got the whole snare and just copy that, and I can just paste this to a new pattern, and then I can kind of just trigger. So if I go where a snare would hit, and I'm on this channel, well, let's go back onto this channel. Oh, I want to play OA. Oh yeah, cool. And we've lost a bit of level there for some reason with this instrument, so maybe let's go and put it up 6 dB. Sometimes I think it just gets a bit. And then maybe I take it down there. Okay, and so I now want a time stretch. So if I go S there, and then I know the end of the sample is FF, so I can go FF there, and I can actually just drag all the way up and then interpolate between these 2 points. Oh, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Oh, yes. And what I actually was doing there was I wasn't re-triggering the sample over and over again. So what you've got to do is trigger the sample over and over again like this for every value that you have, and then I can actually just put those same note values in. So we've got this effect now. And you can kind of change this. If I want it to not go quite to the end, I could say put like an A in that bottom one and interpolate there. Which is really cool. What's also a good idea is to actually go and render this to a sample and then to kind of reverse it back out. And you get the kind of the time stretch going in, and then you get the reverse time stretch coming out, which is what's happening here. Another really common trick is to pitch up and down, and I showed you earlier how I'm pitching up and down in this instrument. Just here, maybe in this little section. But what's actually happening there is if I delete these notes, it's going to keep on playing the instrument at the pitch above, and so the speed's going to be all wrong. But what you can do, similar to where I just copied from my instrument, you can actually just go and find a snare again, and I've pasted it to a new track, and I've got to delete all these slice commands, so I can hold Alt and just drag in that area. And that's another very common technique, is to pitch individual hits up and down. So another good thing you can do to spice up your drums is to layer them with hits from other breaks or other sounds and one-shots. And I went before and I found two sort of tribal hits when I was scouting around on TrackLib looking for samples for this tutorial. A good thing to try here almost from the beginning is just filtering some of the real lows out of the sample, putting a big reverb on them, and also a delay can work really well. And let's just go there, maybe a nice big reverb. I just want to cut the real sub so it can sit on top of my kick drum if I want it to. And often you will layer these hits at the start of a pattern or the midpoint of a pattern, kind of on a kick or on a snare, so on the main on beats to emphasize, say, the downbeat or the first hit of a pattern. So let's just try that now. If I go here. And so maybe this is a good place where I have my original 8 bars, and then I can have this as kind of a kickstart to telling my ear that there's a new pattern happening, like here. Cool. And then maybe I could put one here again. Maybe I put the other one here. Maybe I go and put it at this place, and maybe we take a little bit more of that off. Let's have a look at this delay. So I've really just layered that in. I actually, just to make it flow with this track, I had to cut a lot of the low end out, and that's often the case. Is otherwise you get a big build up of low end when you have all these things hitting on the one. Sometimes you can also this sample's actually quite good because it's got a bit of a gap there. But sometimes putting a bit of a tack on and just moving it out of the real kick transient and the snare transient can also help with your layering. And this is the other one here, so if we play this bit. Nice, so it's sounding cool. All the things are sort of coming together and giving interesting things for your ear to listen to. Okay, so I think that's all for me today. I just wanted to show you all the things I know about this sample offset technique. Obviously I wasn't even alive when these old Amiga machines were invented, and so I haven't grown up really using this stuff. I've just kind of approached it as I've been learning Renoise and discovering as much as I can about all these old school styles of making music. That's where a lot of my knowledge has come from. So I hope this has been useful for some of you anyway, and I'll catch you back on my channel very soon. Peace.